All right, it's Sunday. Sunday fun day. You know what time it is. Chapter 20 from the Gospel of Luke, our Bible study, is going on right now. With a little wrinkle from previous installments. Uh, get zesty, really spice things up. Jordan is going to read the passages for us.
All right.
And I'll interrupt when I feel like I need to. Do we need a system? All right.
Yeah,
I'll
just
just
elbow me.
I'll
Just
elbow
elbow
you.
me.
All right.
Okay. And it came to pass that on one of those days, as he taught the people in the temple and preached the gospel, the chief priests and the scribes came upon him with the elders and spake unto him, saying, Tell us, by what authority does thou these things? Or who is he that gave thee this authority? And he answered and said unto them, I will also ask you one thing, and answer me. The baptism of John, was it from heaven or of men? And they reasoned with themselves, saying, If we shall say, From heaven, he will say, Why then believe ye him not?
All right. Well, we can pause there, but we get back into it shortly thereafter. I think this was a little bit confusing to me at first because I was like, what exactly is going on here? Right. He's got this dichotomy. Right. And in the next verse, it says, But and if we say yes of men, all the people will stone us, for they be persuaded that John was a prophet. So, what are the horns of this dilemma? If we shall say from heaven, he will say, Why then believed ye him not? So, what exactly did John the Baptist preach? Right? He was he was a forerunner to
Mhm.
the Messiah, right? And if they say from heaven that John the Baptist was baptizing people, that was the true inspiration, then his message was ordained as well. And that would mean, by extension, that Christ is the Messiah,
Mhm.
right? So, but alternatively, if they say that it's from the people, they will stone him because that means it's not ordained from God,
Mhm.
and that John wasn't a true prophet. So that's kind of the horn of the dilemma.
So are you saying he's caught them in a
He's
bind?
caught them in a bind
Mhm.
rhetorically,
Mhm.
right? So why don't you keep reading? Yeah.
Sure. But and if we say, Of men, all the people will stone us, for they be persuaded that John was a prophet. And they answered, that they could not tell whence it was. And Jesus said unto them, Neither tell I you by what authority I do these things.
All right. So what else do we want to say here? Because they fail to make a decision on this, right? It undermines their authority. It really brings into question how much discernment they have and whether or not they're truly after the truth,
Mhm.
right? Because there can be so stymied by thinking about what individuals will think about how they come down in this dilemma.
Right.
So Jesus is like, look, I really don't owe it to you to explain myself or give you an answer because your discernment is kind of terrible, right? You're caught in this paradox and you don't really have the courage to break out of it. And I think that's an interesting sort of idea that Jesus is really only sort of interested, it seems from this parable, talking like revealing the full truth to individuals that he thinks have prioritized the truth and who aren't just Pharisees and elitists and people who are trying to ensnare him.
Mhm. There does seem to be this theme throughout Luke of a turning inward for discernment,
Mhm,
and when seeking external validation,
mhm.
that is met with criticism or even, I guess you could say, punishment in the case of John the Baptist's father early on.
Yeah, I mean, discernment is huge. Discernment is absolutely huge.
We were talking this morning, or I was ranting this morning about how currently that's probably one of the greatest things to develop within oneself,
Yep.
given how chaotic and confusing the external reality
You
can
need
appear.
you need something to focus upon,
Right.
something some north star to guide you.
That's right. Okay.
So verse 9.
Then began he to speak to the people this parable. A certain man planted a vineyard and let it forth to husbandmen, and went into a far country for a long time. And at the season he sent his servants to the husbandmen, that they should give him of the fruit of the vineyard. But the husbandmen beat him and sent him away empty. And again he sent another servant, and they beat him also, and entreated him shamefully, and sent him away empty. And again he sent a third, and they wounded him also, and cast him out. Then said the Lord of the vineyard, what shall I do? I will send my beloved son. It may be they will reverence him when they see him. But when the husbandmen saw him, they reasoned among themselves, saying, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him, that the inheritance may be ours. So they cast him out of the vineyard and killed him. What therefore shall the Lord of the vineyard do unto them? He shall come and destroy these husbandmen, and shall give the vineyard to others.
All right, let me stop you there. So he shall come, and so clearly, we're given sort of a parallel, analogous story here with the husbandman in the vineyard.
Mm-hmm.
He's sending all these different servants, which you could say maybe these individuals are like the forerunners of the prophets of the Old Testament. And then ultimately he sends his own son.
Mm-hmm.
They kill his son, right? This foreshadows Jesus'
Right.
own crucifixion, right? That is yet to occur. So we have, he shall come and destroy these husbandmen. So then we're getting an image of this more vengeful Christ, right? And ultimately, this is going to connect to the destruction of the second temple, in the destruction of Jerusalem in 70
Mm-hmm.
AD, and shall give the vineyard to others. Well, who are the others? What's the analog to others, right? Who do you think these others might be? If we were thinking about this as being an analogous parallel of the Christ story, who has
Mm-hmm.
Jesus come for? Initially.
Everyone?
Well, not
The
no,
Gentiles?
well, the Gentiles would be the others. Initially, this goes to the Jews first, right? But then,
Right. Okay.
as we talked about last week with the different types of kingdoms, right? The kingdom
Mm-hmm.
of heaven and the kingdom of God, at least the way that Robert Breaker was breaking this down, whether or not that is universally accepted, I think is up for debate. That because it wasn't accepted widely amongst the Jewish population at that time, it then went forward to the Gentiles.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that matches up here, and shall give the vineyard to others, and others be the Gentiles.
Mm-hmm.
And when they heard it, they said, God forbid, right? Because they know kind of, I guess they sense what is going to be visited upon them
Mm-hmm.
because of this. Okay. So why don't you do 17?
Sure. And he beheld them and said, what is this? Then that is written, the stone which the builders rejected, the same has become the head of the corner.
Okay, this is a very important verse. It has a lot of ink has been spilt on this. I
Yeah.
can't go too deep into it, but when he's talking about what is this then that is written, this is a direct reference from a messianic passage in the Old Testament, Psalm 118:22.
Hmm.
And he's going to quote it here in what follows. But you may have even heard this before. The stone which the builders rejected, the same has become the head of the corner, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this gets into our talk about different sorts of temples, right? We're talking about building these temples. And you could talk in some way about the temples uh, being this architecture of this priestly class, right? Of these Pharisees, and they have rejected this stone that ultimately is going to be the foundation,
Mm.
depending on how you view a cornerstone. A cornerstone can be seen as part of the foundation or perhaps a capstone.
Mm.
There's some debate about what exactly that means. Either the completion or the foundation for a new work, which you,
Either way, it's a very important piece of the structure
yeah.
that without it, the structure falls.
Right. So, and we get a little bit more clarity on that as he quotes from Psalm 118. So why don't you
Mhm.
keep reading?
I want to interject.
Yeah.
I'm not recalling all of the details, but this seems to parallel the story of Young and the stone he received that was
Yes. Didn't
delivered to him.
Yeah. Yeah, right,
What?
he paraphrased it, I think, to some degree when his Bollingen stone, right? When people
Yes.
mocked the stone.
But
It
I recall I'll have to go back, and visit it, but I remember, like, the way that he came about getting the stone that he personally used
Right.
has a bit of this to
Do
it.
you recall the story?
No,
I think some builders were building his home at
that's
Bollingen,
right, that's right.
and he either asked for it or it was extra. So he obviously with this Psalm 118 in mind or Luke 20 in mind was referencing that when he put it on the stone, this
Mhm.
stone that the builders rejected, which gets into this larger conversation about the philosopher's stone and its connection to Christ, whatever the philosopher's stone is, but not prepared to go into that.
Yeah, I just wanted to note it
Yeah.
because we did a conversation on that
Yeah.
months ago
Yeah.
on the channel.
Some people think that there's like occult things going on here. Like clearly, when you talk about, you know, building things where you start talking about like guilds and things of that
Sure.
nature.
Yeah.
Okay. And that
Obviously masonry.
right. And so we're speaking masterfully here. So
Mhm.
some people pointed to this is that there is a more esoteric meaning behind this than what we're talking about here today.
Mhm. Cool.
All right.
Whosoever shall fall upon that stone shall be broken, but on whomsoever it shall fall, it will grind him to powder. And the chief priests and the scribes, the same hour, sought to lay hands on him. And they feared the people, for they perceived that he had spoken this parable against them.
All right. Let's look at 18 again. So not only is this stone being rejected and it's going to become the foundation or the completion of the new temple, whatever that is, we're talking about like different um, evolutions
Mhm.
of this faith tradition, right? Whoever so anybody that opposes it, right? Whosoever shall fall upon that stone shall be broken, right? But on whomsoever it shall fall, it will grind him to powder. Not only is this again foreshadowing those individuals that are antichrist, but also again, I think it's pointing to the destruction of the temple
Mhm.
in its own sort of masterful way of speaking.
Yeah. Did you want to speak at all to 19?
They feared I mean, just that the that they're afraid to arrest Christ because of his
Yeah.
popularity with the people. That's all I really had for that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, once an idea or a belief or a movement gets large enough,
Mhm,
it's really beyond the control of any authority.
mhm.
Okay. And they watched him and sent forth spies, which should feign themselves just men, that they might take hold of his words, that so they might deliver him unto the power and authority of the governor. And they asked him, saying, Master, we know that thou sayest and teachest rightly, neither acceptest thou the person of any, but teachest the way of God truly. Is it lawful for us to give tribute unto Caesar, or no? But he perceived their craftiness and said unto them, Why tempt ye me? Shew me a penny. Whose image and superscription hath it? They answered and said, Caesar's. And he said unto them, Render therefore unto Caesar the things which be Caesar's, and unto God the things which be
All
God's.
right. So what does it mean that these individuals were trying to tempt him? I think the idea is to throw him off kilter so he says something that is seditious that ultimately gives grounds for his arrest.
Sure.
And this, the way that Jesus talks, clearly he's like many moves ahead of whoever is interrogating him. So he's already thought it out. And I think passages like this, I think people get a little frustrated that there isn't some sort of complete philosophical system that Christ
Mhm.
leaves
Mhm.
behind or something like that. But his genius is clearly on display here. He's always dinking and dunking and
Yeah.
able to to
I've
say the
heard.
right thing and to give himself wiggle room. It's kind of a sight to behold.
Yeah,
It's pretty awesome.
yeah, yeah. I've never heard anyone before talk about Yeshua playing 12D chess,
Yeah.
but I don't know if you've seen the chess
Mhm.
sets
Mhm.
in Star Trek.
Of course I
Of
have.
course.
Yeah.
Um, but yes.
Well, the one that Spock plays, right,
Yeah,
against Kirk?
that's right.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Um, and they could not take hold of his words before the people, and they marveled at his answer and held their peace. Then came to him certain of the Sadducees, which deny that there is any resurrection, and they asked him.
Alright, let me stop you there. Okay. I I don't know the exact pronunciation.
I knew this was
I think
coming.
it's Sadducees, alright? And I'm not going to be able to do this perfectly. I'm not some sort of expert on this, but I beefed up on a little bit before, uh, we went on air. The
Mhm,
Sadducees were a particular sect, I guess within Judaism, that highly prioritized the Torah or the Pentateuch over any other books of the Bible. And
mhm,
I'm not enough of a history buff to know exactly when the Old Testament was canonized. I have to look into that. But um, their entire theology was built upon what occurred in those first 5 books of the Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. I think I'm missing one, but let me look
mhm,
that up. First 5 books of the Bible. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is the one that I've forgotten. And they deny the resurrection, which and they also deny other things like angels, which is totally mystifying to me. And I went on a little bit of a rabbit trail with that.
mhm,
But because there is no explicit talk about the dead rising again in the first 5 books, the Torah, they don't subscribe to that.
mhm,
Although there are a number of other passages in the Old Testament, specifically Daniel 12:2, Isaiah 26:19, and Ezekiel 37:1 through 14. I'll just give you Daniel 12:2. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. So, those sparse, there are notions of the resurrection sprinkled throughout the Old Testament. Now, some scholars of religion will say that this is because of later Zoroastrian influence or something like that. Um, which raises a very interesting question about like, why do you even have a religion if you don't believe in an afterlife or you don't believe in the immortality of the
hmm,
soul? I remember hearing that growing up that like someone told me that Jews didn't believe in the afterlife. And I thought that was very strange because I think I knew enough even as a child to be like, that can't be completely true. But this group, the Sadducees, believe that. And in addition to that, they didn't believe in angels, which doesn't make any sense because if you've read the book of Genesis, there are angels in the book of Genesis that specifically Adam and Eve are barred from going back into the garden
mm,
by an angel with like a sword of fire, like a
mhm.
lightsaber. So, yeah, I just wanted to include that. I thought that was super interesting. That was one of the things that I learned preparing for this.
Yeah, there's a lot to deep dive there.
Mhm. Yep.
Saying, Master, Moses wrote unto us, if any man's brother die, having a wife, and he die without children, that his brother should take his wife and raise up seed unto his brother. There were therefore 7 brethren, and the first took a wife and died without children, and the second took her to wife, and he died childless, and the third took her, and in like manner the 7 also, and they left no children, and died. Last of all, the woman died also. Therefore, in the resurrection, whose wife of them is she? For 7 had her to wife. And Jesus answering said unto them, the children of this world marry, and are given in marriage. But they which shall be accounted worthy to obtain that world, and the resurrection from the dead, neither marry, nor are given in
All
marriage.
right, let's stop right there. That's a big deal. Okay. I think at some point in every person's philosophical journey. They think
Mhm.
about what happens after I die? Like, do I
Mhm.
marry? Am I still married to my first wife, my second wife? If I got divorced, how does this work?
Right.
Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because we've been given these cultural depictions of what the afterlife looks like. But Jesus is going to tell us here, neither marry nor are given in marriage, that in the next verse, neither can they die anymore, for they are equal unto the angels and are children of God, being the children of the resurrection.
Mm.
All right. So the angels, here we have an idea of what the afterlife is going to look like. The, we're not going to be married in the afterlife. There and why not? Well, a part of that I think is you've got to think about, why are we married here on earth?
Mhm.
So a big part of marriage is procreation.
Yeah, I mean, that's
From
the implication
right,
in the preceding.
right. Well, you don't. There's no need to procreate in heaven, right?
Mhm.
And I guess what's the point of procreating? I mean, from a biological perspective, right? It's like survival of the fittest and passing on genes, et cetera, et cetera. I think from a biblical perspective, it's something totally different. But there's no need for the angels to reproduce. Like, either their number is set, or there's that's just not how the game of the video game that is heaven is played. We're not trying to procreate there, because everyone is already eternal. We don't have to have the
Right.
substitute of eternality, not eternal, immortal, I should say.
Right.
The substitute for immortality by passing your name down, having a line that is identifiable to
Hmm.
give sort of a proxy immortality. That seems to be kind of what marriage and procreation are for. So we don't need that in heaven. And the other reason for marriage, that it's implied here, is that is for some sort of spiritual union.
Hmm.
And I think the idea is, in heaven, the spiritual union will be so great that we won't need the bond of marriage. The bond of marriage on earth is sort of in a way to approach the spiritual union that we're going to have in heaven. But because that spiritual union will be greater in heaven, and because there's no need to continue on a genetic line, there's no need to procreate, there's no need to marry.
That's
So,
really
yeah.
interesting. Both those points. We could go pretty deep in both of them.
Mhm.
But
Whatever you wanna talk about. I mean,
yeah, it sounds like you're talking about marriage on the earth plane almost being a training ground or a experience we can have to kind of prepare us for a greater union with God.
or yeah, I
Or
would say
maybe it's
so.
just happening.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just
No, no, no.
rationalizing this experience, if that makes sense.
I think it's an interesting question, if unmarried people can have the spiritual union that married people can have according to the Bible, which is a whole other conversation which I've
Right.
not dug into. It would seem to not be necessary. Maybe there's a different type of union that they have. Maybe you can have a spiritual union that doesn't involve marriage. Um,
Well, thinking of our conversation with um, the lovely woman who works at the restaurant we like to go to, um, talking about how her belief system kind of compels her to live in community with those within her like religious
mhm,
sect and how difficult that is, but also how forming that is and how it almost forces them to work through, I guess, flaws within their own character
mhm,
because of that proximity, but that shared focus on unity with God.
mhm.
I'm maybe putting words onto it that she
Yeah,
might not,
yeah,
but that was a really interesting conversation. That's not a way that we choose to live,
yeah,
but very different from just marriage. But it is a marriage in a way.
yeah. It's an interesting question. I think you can have spiritual unions without marriage.
Hmm.
The question is, you know, do certain unions exclude others? Are certain unions greater than others? Clearly, there's a place for um, unmarried people in
Right.
terms of having some sort of spiritual unity with God here on earth. Um,
Yeah. Nowhere here does he say like one must do this
mhm,
to
enter in.
enter.
But
Yeah.
why don't you read the next passage too?
Sure.
36.
Yeah. Neither can they die any more, for they are equal unto the angels, and are the children of God, being the children of the resurrection.
Yeah. So, I mean, I thought about getting hung up on this, for they
Mhm,
are equal unto the angels. Like, what does
mhm.
this mean? Do we become angels when we die? I think it's I think it's more accurate to say we are like the angels
Yeah.
in the sense that we become immortal, but clearly an an angel that was made from the beginning of time and a resurrected human have different roles in the divine schema. So there's
Yeah.
still, so even though they may have some qualities in common and maybe equal in a certain respect, they're not the same type of being. I think it would be too much to say we are now angels after we resurrect.
Yeah.
But a lot of people want that again, the cultural picture of that, right? Is you get your harp and your
Oh,
halo,
yeah.
wings,
Yeah.
and now you're like a guardian angel or something. I don't think it works like that.
That is a really interesting trope, given that the stories we have of angels are typically not of human beings who died or ascended or were taken up into the heavens. Quite the opposite. Like, they separated from the heavens and came down here.
Mhm. But occasionally they can masquerade as men.
Right.
They, but and they may even take, well, who knows, they may take the form of people that would seem like they were individual, like people we may know or somebody familiar.
Yeah. Well,
But
that's something I'm really curious about. Can an angel I mean, I don't lack the language here, or I lack the language here. Could an angel incarnate as a human in the flesh? That would be to me a separate experience or thing than a angel taking on the form of a human, kind of how we've talked about Jesus being born into the human form versus just like appearing onto the earth plane as a full-fledged man or even taking over the body
that's a good,
of
that's a,
an existing man. Like, I don't know. I just think it's interesting.
yeah, I don't know the answer to that. The passage that I had in mind was Hebrews
Mm,
13:2. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares.
hmm.
So whether or not they just have the form or they're actually incarnate in the flesh and what that actually, all
Yes.
the implications of that, I don't know. I'd have to get back to you on that.
But kinda back to the Larkin maps and how we're talking about the kingdom of God and then basically the earth kind of overlapping and then separating and then coming back together. It just creates the opportunity for a lot of really interesting overlaps between the 2
Oh yeah.
realms.
Yeah, there's all sorts of back doors here.
Mhm.
There's all sorts of There's all sorts of ways in and out, although it typically comes from a higher place down into our realm or a lower place up into our realm, but we don't
Is
nec
that what's in Antarctica?
maybe so, maybe so, maybe so.
Okay, should we keep
Yeah,
going?
yeah,
Okay, I could
37,
spiral about this a
yeah.
while. Now that the dead are raised, even Moses shooed at the bush when he called the Lord the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob.
Okay, alright. So the Sadducees, deny immortality,
Mm,
right? And this what what Jesus is referencing here, um is when I believe it's in Exodus 3:6, where God speaks to Moses at the burning bush. And he says, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And this is another like brilliant rhetorical flair of Christ. What um because he references that, he's like, I am the God of Abraham, I am the God of Isaac, I am, I am, not I was.
mm,
So the idea is that in some way, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob live in a sense. Now we've looked at these Larkin diagrams, right? And do you recall from memory where they might be before?
Abraham's bosom?
Yeah, exactly. We
Yeah.
talked about this as being paradise or Abraham's bosom, where the
Yeah.
Old Testament saints have gone to sleep until what's known as the harrowing of hell, when Christ is crucified, descends into hell, where John the Baptist might be preparing everybody for the Messiah. That's one of the crazy things we talked about.
Right.
And then they break out of there. We're going to look at this another Larkin diagram, which we've
Mhm.
not looked at here previously. Um, so by invoking that, what he's essentially saying is, if if the Father was um, not a God of living individuals, he would have spoke about these people in the past tense.
Mhm.
I was the God of Abraham. I was the God of Isaac. I was the God of Jacob. But not anymore because they're totally annihilated and out of existence.
Yeah.
But he doesn't say that.
Or or
Mm.
it and maybe these are the same thing sort of. It hints at the nature of time and what time is for a god
that
or for God.
that's another way you could potentially deal with that. If
Yeah.
God is present in all the different moments,
Right. There would never be past tense for God. God
you
is.
know, the implications of that are vast.
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about that a little bit on the Mount of Transfiguration,
Uh-huh.
where there's a sense where um, God is appearing to multiple people of the Bible. Uh,
Right.
it's the present for them, and they think they're looking into into the past or the future, depending on their perspective. But it's all the present for them. So
Mhm.
that's an interesting idea. Why don't you read the next passage too?
Yeah. For he is not a God of the dead, but of the living, for all live unto him.
Right, and so this is light living doesn't just mean on the earth plane.
Right.
You can live in other places of the hyperdimensional matrix.
Yeah, this
You
makes
may
the whole
die, you may
concept of death very
or yeah.
weird.
Yeah, the body may disintegrate, but that's not death.
Yeah.
You're still living in a sense.
Is there really any death? Is that the
That's a
big
big
trick?
that's a big question. There which gets to a view known as I believe annihilationism,
Okay.
annihilationalism, but I y yeah, that it's an
Yeah.
interesting question. I don't know the answer to that.
Because if these beings are going into the quote underworld and still have a relationship with God,
Mhm,
which at minimum we see within Abraham's bosom,
mhm,
that's occurring because
mhm,
he's naming these people
mhm,
explicitly.
mhm.
Who's even dead? What's even
What
dead?
ev what is death? And I think we'll get to that in a
Does it
s
exist?
let's bracket that question
Okay.
in the
I'm
diagram.
spiraling.
No, you're not spiraling. Let's just get to the end and
Okay.
ask that question again.
Okay. Then certain of the scribes answering said, Master, thou hast well said. And after that they durst not ask him any question at all. And he said unto them, How say they that Christ is David's son?
Right. Yeah, keep going.
And David himself saith in the book of Psalms.
Yeah, let's okay. Okay.
Okay.
It's so so the idea here is how can Jesus simultaneously be part of David's lineage,
Mhm.
but also be the Messiah, right? Also be God. And so he has us directs our attention to the book of Psalms. Specifically, what he's talking about is Psalm 110. Um, so
Lots of 11s and 22s today.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, why don't you keep reading here?
Okay. And David himself saith in the book of Psalms, The Lord said unto my Lord, Sit thou on my right hand, till I make thine enemies thy footstool. David therefore called him Lord. How is he then his son? Then in the audience of all the people he said unto his disciples, Beware of the scribes, which desire to walk in long robes and love greetings into the markets and the highest seats in the synagogues and the chief rooms at feasts, which devour widows' houses for a shoe, make long prayers. The same shall receive greater damnation.
Okay. So I'm trying to figure out how to appropriately deal with this question about, and he said unto them, How say they that Christ is David's son? Um, I've been using Grok a little bit lately. Like let me see what Grok had to say this.
Okay.
Um, the meaning of Luke 20:41 lies in Jesus' challenge to the conventional view of the Messiah as merely a human descendant of David. By asking why the Messiah is called the Son of David and linking it to Psalm 110, Jesus reveals that the Messiah is both David's son, human, and David's Lord, divine. This points to his own identity as the Messiah who embodied both natures, prompting a deeper understanding of his role and silencing his critics in the process. So it's it's not that difficult for us because we've been sort of broken into this idea
Mhm.
that um, Christ is both God and man. But at the time, this is sort of going to be a beguiling concept when they're working off this operation that it's just going to be someone that comes down through this line. But he points out this um, from the book, this passage from the book of Psalms, and I guess specifically, it's capitalized, "The Lord said unto my Lord."
Mm.
These are different words. If you go back to
Mhm.
the original um, languages here, I believe the second one is Adonai versus the first one, um, which may be Yahweh. But the idea that he's pointing out that it's going to come from him and also is Yahweh.
Mhm.
And then the idea that beware of the scribes, which is this is a really wonderful passage here, which essentially gets at the externalization of the faith, the trappings of it, the long robes, the regalia,
Mhm.
the the priestly garments and everything like this are valued more than the actual faith and the pursuit of truth, and that this is a great danger that occurs within religion. There's always this need to attain status and preserve that status rather than grapple with these difficult things that would upend their conception
Yeah.
of what they think religion is. Now, what I thought to be the most fascinating thing here was in the very last verse, which devour widows' houses and for a shoe make long prayers. So it's superficial. They're ultimately after um, wages and appearing uh, uh, knowledgeable, et cetera, and pretension, right?
Mhm.
But there's a great danger in this. The same shall receive greater damnation. If you don't think too much about that, I think that you could just be like, preach, amen, etc. But the same shall receive greater damnation, which sets up this question of, do individuals in the afterlife, in heaven, hell, whatever we're talking about, do they receive greater punishment and greater reward depending on their behavior on earth? Right now, up until this point, we've been talking about it kind of as like a zero sum game. Like you go here, you go there, and you're kind of, and I think you've got it up here. We've got a,
Mhm.
and we, before today, we've looked at a lot of these different Larkin graphs and we've been trying to figure out, okay, when do you go here? What do you have to do to get out of here and go there? Just kind of understanding the basic rules. But we haven't really asked ourselves about the quality of the experience once you get there. And this one passage from verse 47 implies that like individuals who may go to hell, we've looked at these as being the wicked ones, right, who go to the underworld versus the Old Testament saints that go to paradise, right?
Mhm.
That say like an individual who was ignorant may suffer less than say an individual like this priest class who knows better and defraud widows with their status and knowledge, etc. So they actually might be tormented more in hell. And though it doesn't say so here, there are other passages in the Bible which I don't have with me right now that though it doesn't say this explicitly, may give one the right to infer that there is a greater participation of joy and beauty in heaven depending on your performance on earth. So this isn't like a doctrine that's like built into um into what every Christian has to believe, this sort of thing, but it's kind of there between the lines. And part of the reason why I brought these diagrams in here is, we've spent so much time looking at the underworld, we haven't looked at the heavens. And so I found this to be kind of interesting that we have a chart that has both of them here. Okay. And it's like the way, if you can see the ones that like you look at the compartment of paradise in the underworld, right? These souls, these he has written here, the righteous souls Christ delivered from the underworld go to what's known as the present paradise. And then the souls of the righteous are like reunited with their bodies back down to earth. And then, along with the translation saints and the first resurrection saints, they are called up to the judgment seat of Christ. Do you see that? Go up, scroll up. So, yeah, you got it. So, like, here the Old Testament saints go up here, then they're reunited with their bodies, and then with the translation saints, they're called up into heaven to the judgment seat of Christ. So this it's like a roller coaster. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you're breaking out of paradise, and then you're called up into heaven, and then you get your body back, and then you're called up to the judgment seat of Christ. That's just one example of this metaphysical
Shoots in
yeah,
this is
roller.
great.
So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's all I got.
Oh. You don't you don't want to explain this New Jerusalem?
Well, the New Jerusalem is something that supposedly descends from the sky in Revelation 21:2 when they have the merger of heaven and earth again.
Oh.
So when you have the dimensions come back together again.
Hmm.
But
Interesting.
but I'd have to study up on it.
Yeah.
And I guess chronologically, this looks like it occurs after the great white throne judgment, which we talked
Hmm.
about before, where the resurrection of the wicked happens, right? And then I guess there's the whole book of life, and they're adjudicated, and along with the fallen angels that are called up from Tartarus to the great white throne, and then ultimately they are cast into a lake of fire. And
Right.
this gets into your question about what is death. Are they annihilated in the lake of fire, or are they tormented in the lake of fire?
Hmm.
Let's just Google it. Or I should grok it. I'll grok it real quick while you is there something else you wanted to ask there?
No, I mean, that's what I mean, we could spiral about this for
Yeah,
a while.
yeah, ask. I'll just see what grok has to say.
Yeah. But we've talked about the Great White Throne a lot before in this series. We've discussed the Lake of Fire, we've discussed the Abyss. Is Tartarus where Abraham's bosom is, or is
No,
that elsewhere?
Tartarus is where the fallen angels
That's where the
are.
fallen angels are.
Paradise and Abraham's
I've
bosom are
seen it.
synonymous.
Okay, that's up here. This is interesting. Like this concept of hell in my head previously was more a like umbrella term with things nested in it.
Mhm.
This implies it's not that. It's a compartment under the underworld, separate of the bottomless pit and separate of the lake of fire.
But hell is?
Yeah.
But in some ways connected, right? You see paradise
Right.
and hell have the great gulf between them,
Right.
right? So there are ways to kind of get in and out of
Yeah.
these places based on the map. But Grok had this to say. In traditional Christian interpretation, particularly among those with a literal reading of Revelation, the lake of fire represents eternal torment for the damned,
Okay.
a place of unending suffering and separation from God. Some denominations, like Seventh day Adventist or those holding to this is annihilationism, argue it's not eternal torment, but rather a complete destruction where the wicked are consumed and cease to exist. The text itself doesn't fully clarify the nature of the punishment beyond its finality and association with fire.
Mhm.
So, yeah, so it's debated. It's
Right.
not clear, but
It seems this is a new thought to me. It
mm,
seems you could read the Bible and interpret it as there really isn't an end to the soul either way. It's just the conditions that it experiences. It's debated.
right. And then, uh, there are some people who believe that ultimately the the lake of fire will purify them enough that even so that they'll be able to be saved
Interesting.
eventually. There's but
Which is the premise of the good place, sort of. That's the hypothesis
you'd have to. I haven't
that
thought about
Michael creates.
it. Right.
Anyway, we don't
Yeah.
this isn't a
Yeah.
good
We'll
place
have to get
video,
it. Yeah.
but But really, this whole bottom section of this particular chart, I feel, is explored extensively in The Good Place. Not that The Good Place is necessarily biblical,
Mm.
um,
It's pretty
to the
biblical in some
T.
ways.
Well, I'm just saying, I
Yeah.
wouldn't
Yeah.
it's not like claiming to be a biblically accurate
Yeah.
representation of what Christians believe, but
It would be an interesting exercise to apply The Good Place to this map and try to figure out exactly
right,
where it
because
is.
there is this they go between the
Yeah.
realms. They go between hell and paradise.
I you they the to be continued. To be continued.
Okay.
I'm not trying to shoot you down. I'm not trying to shoot you down.
Yeah.
But paradise as it's defined here, probably not. They're probably not getting
Oh, I see.
yeah,
Like, the implicate well, this is our human assumption
yeah.
when we watched it, is that they're talking about heaven up here versus hell down here.
Mhm.
But I feel like, without giving too much away, it is feasible that the entire show just happens down here.
It's possible. I'd have to revisit it.
I probably spoiled too much
No, you didn't.
already.
You didn't.
It's been out a long time.
Yeah. I think it's been out 10 years. All right.
Cool. Well,
I think I'll look into a little bit of these questions about the finality of the Lake of Fire.
is there anyone that you're aware of that interprets these chutes and ladders to play out like reincarnation?
That's the Bible doesn't say,
Yeah,
but but
because I'm saying it's like
there
this
is
refinery process. Like, do you
there's some debate about this because there are two creations in the book of Genesis. And when they're talking about the creation,
right?
there's like the book of Genesis just does two different creations, and some people have claimed that something may have pre-existed the creation of Adam and Eve and would
Mhm.
potentially explain how they were able to multiply their numbers so quickly in the civilizations that were encountered outside of
Mhm.
the garden. But
There's aliens and spaceships,
uh,
right?
I don't want to
I've
over.
been with you.
No, no, it's not that. I just
Just
don't.
on
I
purpose.
don't want to say. I don't want to speak things I'm ignorant of.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know.
I'm being funny. I'll speak ignorantly.
Nah,
How about that?
uh,
He's just having fun.
all right, I'll look into it.
Okay. Awesome.
All
Well,
right.
any other closing remarks?
Nope, that's it.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody.
All right.